This is the Dublin European Law Institute podcast, produced at Dublin City University. I'm your host, Charlie Halford.
Andrew Forde, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today.
Pleasure.
We had a hugely successful event on 30th of October on the age of backlash surrounding the European Convention on Human Rights and the new political reality surrounding it. Great event, great attendance and great lineup. So well done on that.
Thanks, Charlie.
And it's great to just have you here to sit down and discuss some of the issues that we talked about at that event even further. To start off, could you please remind us what the European Convention on Human Rights is, how that fits within the Council of Europe, and why it's become such a political issue since the Reykjavík Summit in 2023?
First of all, thanks, Charlie. Great pleasure to be here and to chat to you about something that's very close to my heart, but also very important for all of us right now. As we just celebrate the 75th anniversary of the European Convention on Human Rights, I think it's really the right moment to sort of reflect on where we've come from, but also where we currently are. The European Convention on Human Rights is a multilateral treaty. It's signed by all 46 members of the Council of Europe, which is an organization that's not the same as the European Union. It actually predates the European Union. It was actually the origin of the flag and the anthem and all those things people tend to forget. It's a very important organization, has more than 200 conventions, but the ECHR, in a sense, is the bedrock. It's the fundamental human rights treaty. And what's special about it is that it was set, essentially it was drafted after World War II. It was to give expression to the rights that were enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which wasn't a binding treaty. And it was really seen as the first steps to enforcing those rights. And what it did was it set out certain rights that were seen to be fundamental, the basics: right to life, prohibition of torture, prohibition of slavery, right to non-discrimination, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, right to family and private life, and so on and so forth. Those rights that were considered to be very much fundamental. And what was interesting about the ECHR was that it also set up what we call a control mechanism, which is the European Court of Human Rights. And what was special about that was that an individual, you or I, or anybody else, could bring their state to court for infringing their rights. Of course, after exhausting remedies, as we call it, domestically, but they could bring their state to court. So this was quite revolutionary of its time and has been enormously impactful in a positive way, really right across Europe, serving the rights of individuals right across Europe, and in a sense, enhancing our security, enhancing our prosperity. And I just finish on this point. I think one of the interesting paradoxes is it's precisely the success of the European Convention on Human Rights that people somehow now take a lot of the rights that it enshrined for granted.
Yeah.
And they forget that actually it's the ECHR and the Council of Europe that they have to thank for many of the protections that they enjoy and expect on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Looking back to our 30th of October event, who was calling for reform of the ECHR? And what kind of reform are they talking about?
Well, it's a good question. Look, I suppose the first thing is to say that calls for reform or backlash or pressure or whatever you want to call it, none of that is new. That's totally normal part of the business of multilateralism. States, necessarily push back on additional obligations. That's just what states do. It's a pretty natural reaction. If they feel it's judgment on what they're doing, if they feel that it's going to cost more money, if they feel that something is out of line with public opinion, there's a pushback. So this has been a normal part of the process since the Council of Europe was founded in the late 40s. And in a sense, there's no progress without some friction. It's like, riding a bike. You can't progress without friction. So it's normal. It's a question really about how the system evolves, and does it evolve in a way that's inclusive, transparent, democratic, evidence-based, honest, or something different. And what we've seen in the last, I would say, the last 9 months in particular, we've seen a change in tone. Certain member states, some that are very prominent, Italy, Denmark, the UK, and others, are calling for some fundamental changes such that their obligations effectively will be diminished when it comes to, for example, deportation of migrants. And this is where the discussion is largely centered. It's around controlling migration, even though it's a fallacy.
Yeah.
But we'll come back to that in a moment. So some of the calls, there's a range of proposals that seem to be circulating, none of them transparently. It's really been behind closed doors, all very cloak and dagger. I've heard everything from an interpretive declaration, which would encourage the court to be a bit more conservative in terms of its rulings. I've heard of some discussion about an additional protocol to the convention. And then there's the nuclear option, which is leaving the convention, which has now become a kind of a political mainstay in the United Kingdom. But the truth is, Charlie, we don't know, A, what states think is the problem, nor B, what they think the solution would be. This is all speculation for the moment. And that's the most frustrating thing about it. We don't really know where we are until states put their cards on the table.
And some would say that there's just pure political theatre going on. But you take these seriously, these threats?
I think you have to take them seriously. You have to treat states, you have to accept the bona fides of states, even though it's difficult to not see this as being a very political process, where in a sense, you could even say the ECHR is being weaponized or certainly being scapegoated. States are the custodians of the convention and of all the system. They enter into these treaties voluntarily. They are perfectly within their right to discuss the functioning of the system, how to make it more effective, how to, ensure that there's really a meaningful application of the rights, how to ensure that the convention system is, I suppose, responsive to the challenges of the day, and that it's not living in another world, that it understands the public policy challenges that states face. I think that's important. But the question really is, if states want to do this in a way that's really purposeful and meaningful, it should be done openly. It should be done through the systems that exist. It should be done transparently. What do they have to hide?
Yeah. As you said, migration is central to this. So I'd like to know, how does the European Convention of Human Rights actually limit what states can do on migration?
Well, I suppose the first thing to remember about in answering this question is that the European Convention on Human Rights is the minimum standard.
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't create some magical, mystical high bar that only migrants can access the supports. Not at all. It is the most basic of basic protections: right to life, prohibition of torture, and it's inextricably linked to other standards across other international treaties. For example, the Refugee Convention, and also reflects customary international law. That you don't send someone back to a place where there's a well-founded risk that they might be tortured or killed. So the restrictions that the ECHR places on states are minimal and basic. And you could even look at it in another way. If the ECHR disappeared tomorrow, it wouldn't change neither the migration problem that states are articulating, nor the obligations on states in many cases, because states are still bound to not return someone to a place where they're likely to be tortured, just as an example. In actual fact, what the ECHR does is it supports the state's efforts to try to ensure efficient justice systems, accountability, due process, all of these things that are very much, I think, at the core of democracy and the rule of law in states. So I do think that the migration question, it's certainly a public policy challenge for many states. I don't deny that for 1 second. But it seems to be exaggerated. And certainly the ECHR being the sort of big baddie in all of this is a total fallacy. That is, there are migratory trends. We have 117 million people worldwide displaced now, 70 million people internally displaced. We have trends in terms of demographic shifts, climate crises and climate disasters, skills deficits. All of these things are feeding into migratory flows, which are a normal part of human civilization since dot. So I think we need to be really careful not to sort of allow the convention to be weaponized, and at least to have a discussion. If it's about migration, let's have it on facts. The last point I'll make about that is, if you actually look at the statistics in various countries, like if you look at the rulings against the UK, for example, in the European Court of Human Rights, they're few and far between related to this. And the court always affords a very wide, what we call margin of appreciation to states in terms of their actions around these issues.
Is there a danger that if one country pulls out of the ECHR, that others will follow as a chain reaction, as people thought post-Brexit? Or before Brexit, really?
I think there is a danger, there is a risk, but I wouldn't overstate it, because actually the evidence says the opposite. The evidence we've only got really two things to go by. Within the Council of Europe, we have when Turkey decided to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, which dealt with violence against women and domestic violence. Ironically, the Istanbul Convention, Turkey is the country that pulls out of it. No other state has done so. There are a couple of states that have discussed it, but no other state. So that happened several years ago, 4 years ago at this stage. And the other example, of course, is not the Council of Europe, but within the European Union, and that's the UK pulling out of the European Union, which didn't create a cascade of departures. So I don't think that is likely, but it is still certainly a risk, and it's something that I think we need to take seriously. But I think the more important question is, what does it symbolize? If you had a state like the United Kingdom pulling out of the European Convention on Human Rights, what message does that send to less mature democracies? What message does it send about the cohesiveness of the European project, the European family? And also the other thing is, if the United Kingdom or any state was to pull out of the ECHR, they would necessarily have to leave the Council of Europe. It is incompatible with membership. These are inextricably linked systems. So again, is that something that is in the state interest of the UK to be really outside the system themselves, Belarus and the Russian Federation? I'm just not convinced.
Yeah. And if there's anything over the next year that we can look out for about whether the system is holding up or slipping away, what is it?
Well, I think this is moving very quickly. My understanding is that there's a lot, even though all of this is behind closed doors, we don't know officially, which is deeply disappointing. But my expectation is that something will move pretty soon on this. It seems to me that the most likely outcome would be some sort of intergovernmental committee to be established within the Council of Europe system to discuss next steps. So that is the main thing to watch. Of course, in parallel, one must also look about what's happening in the United Kingdom in terms of this whole political discussion in the UK about departure. My colleague and friend, Professor Alice Donald, put it extremely well when she said that it's become a kind of a membership card, a virility test for those on the right to say that leaving the ECHR is what we're going to do. In a sense, almost without a discussion on the merits of it. It's very, very dangerous if that kind of approach, that sort of binary, dichotomous approach prevails in the UK, and the UK abandons the reasoned debate around, well, why? What's the problem? Is the ECHR part of the solution? And even if it is leaving the best option, or is there other ways around it? So I think those two tracks, the Intergovernmental Committee and then the debate in the UK, are two separate but I think overlapping issues that we should follow very, very closely.
Yeah. And if there's one big myth surrounding the ECHR that you'd like to clear up, what would it be?
Well, there's several. I mean, one of the myths is that the ECHR is only for certain groups of people, people on the fringes of society. I think that that's a myth in some places. It's not said out explicitly so often, but I think that's a dangerous myth. The ECHR is for all of us, as benefits us in ways that we don't even appreciate on a day-to-day basis. The building standards of the buildings we're in, the management of our medical records, the air quality outside, the efficiency of our justice systems, the transparency and accountability of our governance. All of these things are related to ECHR standards. But there is still that myth that it's only for some and not others. A second myth is that the ECHR somehow guarantees foreign criminals the right to stay in a European state. That is simply not the case. And statistically, the numbers don't add up. In the UK, for instance, more than 97% of those who claim ECHR rights to not be deported, fail. So it's extremely minor number. So I think they're two important myths. But I think the last thing that I would say in relation to it is one shouldn't take the ECHR for granted either. I think it's really important that even though this is a system that's existed for 75 years, has benefited you and I and millions of other people without us even realizing it, we shouldn't take it for granted. Things can unravel very, very quickly. We all have a stake in this. We need to ensure that we preserve this system. This is a system of basic principles. It's a system of minimum standards. And if we're not preserving those basics, then we are really risk undermining the fundamentals of democracy and the rule of law in our countries.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks,
well
Charlie.
done on all your work with the Agora Group, and thanks again. See you soon.
Thanks, Charlie. Much appreciated. Thanks.
The Agora Group is an independent, pan-European platform committed to open dialogue and balanced, evidence-based debate on key issues concerning the European Convention on Human Rights. It now amasses over 700 members on LinkedIn. If you'd like to know more, follow DELI on our social media platforms.